I was 2 feet away from her. 2 feet. That's how close I was. I don't even have to think about it. It's 100%. It's not 99, it's 100. It's 100%, it was her. It was.
On the 21st of March 1998, the Bradley family from Virginia embarked on what was to be the holiday of a lifetime. Parents Ron and Ivor, 21-year-old son Brad, and daughter Amy, who was just shy of her 24th birthday. They were a tight-knit family, but Amy and her brother Brad were especially close, and more like best friends. Amy Lynn Bradley was a talented and sporty young woman. She was a former swimming instructor and athlete and had her pick of many scholarships after she graduated high school. She was a sports science major and was about to undertake a master's degree in sports psychology. The holiday was a nice opportunity for her and her family to spend some quality time together before Amy started her studies again. Ron Bradley had been given the tickets by his work, and although the family were excited for the all-expenses-paid holiday, Amy seemed less sure on going. Although she was a confident swimmer, she wasn't a fan of the ocean. She finally came round to the idea though, and the family would be travelling on a luxury cruise liner called Rhapsody of the Seas. The ship was taking around 2,500 passengers from Puerto Rico to Aruba. A couple of days into the trip, on March 23rd, the family dined out. The dress code was black tie, and Amy was receiving a lot of attention from fellow passengers and crew members, including the ship's band. Amy and her brother Brad had some official photographs taken that would be available for the families to buy later on. They were seen wearing formal attire along the stairwell of the ship. While the photographs were being taken, Ivor said that a waiter had approached the table asking if he could talk to Amy, as some of the staff wanted to take her to a bar on the mainland before they set off again. Her mother described this as strange, and when Amy and Brad rejoined the table, she told Amy what he had said. Amy agreed with her mother and said she would definitely stay on the ship. After they finished their food, they headed upstairs to the nightclub. Some of the cruise ship staff that the family had seen at dinner were also in there, including the ship's band. At around 1 a.m, Ron and Ivor headed to bed, but Amy and Brad stayed with the people in the band. Amy's mother kissed her, told her she loved her, and that she would see her in the morning. As 4 a.m. rolled round, a tired Brad headed back to the cabin to join his parents, and 15 minutes later, Amy did too. They spoke on the balcony for a while, and Brad headed to bed, leaving Amy there. When her father woke up just after 5 a.m, he said he saw Amy was still on the balcony, and he went back to sleep, satisfied that both of his children were now safe in the cabin. But 30 minutes later, when Ron awoke again, he said that Amy was no longer on the balcony, nor in her bed. All of her belongings were in the cabin, and it appeared the only thing missing were her cigarettes and lighter. Even her shoes were still there. What could have possibly happened in just 30 minutes? Ron assumed she must have headed to the main deck, but after searching for over an hour, it appeared she had vanished. Almost 2 hours after she had last been seen, the captain of the ship authorised a call out over the tannoy for Amy Bradley to head to the service desk.
We went up and looked around the disco and all the different floors, and you realize it wasn't just an everyday situation.
Her parents feared that as the ship was docked, people might begin to try and leave, and this would further complicate the situation. Panic further began to mount in her family's minds when the captain said that regardless of any situation, passengers had to disembark the ship as scheduled.
The cruise liner opens its doors to the streets of Curacao.
Your thoughts must have just been racing with panic that Amy is nowhere to be found, and now the ship is just emptying out.
I said, there's about 3,000 people on here. There's 3,000 eyes and there's 3,000 ears.
With the majority of people now leaving the ship, the captain and his crew began to search for the missing Amy. Her mother Ivor was convinced that her going missing was tied in with the attention she had been receiving the previous evening. As her brother was out looking for her, the bass player of the ship's band, Alistair Douglas, allegedly approached Brad, saying he was sorry to hear about her being missing. As there had been no announcements to confirm she was missing, and with only the captain and security team being aware of this, her brother was confused and concerned that he knew about it. This is a claim that Alistair Douglas would later refute. After almost 12 hours of searching, the crew concluded that Amy was not on the ship, and when her parents begged for an official announcement to be made that she was missing, the captain refused on the grounds it would disturb the other guests. The crew asked the family if she had maybe fallen into the water or committed suicide, but both of these theories were squashed by the Bradley family. Because Amy didn't like the ocean, she would have never gotten too close to the rails, so this seemed impossible to have done on her own accord. She was happy and excited for her future, and suicide just didn't seem viable. The ship had just 4 hours before it would set sail again, and the captain said they either had to disembark or stay on, despite the crew saying that Amy was not on the ship. It was a heartbreaking choice to have to make, but the family eventually chose to disembark in Curacao, and they watched the boat sail away to St. Thomas without them. Essentially stranded in a foreign land, the family contacted the FBI and begged for help. The FBI told them to fly to St. Thomas and get back on the ship at any cost, and on their say-so. The FBI contacted the cruise liner, and upon probing for more information, they determined that a full and thorough search had not actually been carried out. Valuable time had now been lost, and what had started as a dream holiday had descended into a living nightmare for the Bradley family. It was now the 26th of March, and with the FBI on board the ship, it was finally being investigated as a missing persons case. The case would take a sinister turn when the photographer that had taken photos of Amy and Brad realised that these photos had disappeared from the public gallery only a few hours after they had been put up. Only Amy and Brad's photographs were missing. Two panicked witnesses came forward and said they had seen Amy coming out of a lift at around 5:45 a.m, heading back into the nightclub with Alistair Douglas. He was now the last known person to be seen with her. Off the back of this information, he was given a polygraph test, which he passed. The cruise ship had a videographer who would record the holiday as part of promotional material for the company. The same videographer would unknowingly film Amy on the same morning she disappeared, dancing in the nightclub with the bass player. And when he realised he had filmed her, he turned over all his footage to the security team on board with the intent of it going to the FBI. But for unknown reasons, this was not done, and it would be well over a year before the footage would come to light. As soon as the cruise ended, the Bradley family headed back to Curacao to continue their hunt for Amy. A local cab driver told the family that Amy had in fact approached his cab that morning as people had started to disembark the ship. She ran over and asked him where the nearest phone was. His description of Amy convinced the family it was definitely her that he had seen. He told them to look in 3 specific locations on the island, but the searchers turned up nothing. They had been on the island for 4 days and were driving when Brad heard a familiar voice. He was convinced it was Amy calling out his name. When they caught up with the van he thought he heard the sound come from, there was only a driver inside. Brad would say he didn't know if they had followed the wrong van, or simply heard what he'd wanted to hear. The exhausted family eventually had to leave and return home to Virginia. In August 1998, a Canadian tourist called David Carmichael, visiting Curacao, claimed he had come face to face with Amy Bradley.
We were over in a small area where we wash off the equipment in fresh water, and I looked down the beach and I saw a girl walking down the beach with being flanked by 2 people. The minute she heard I spoke English, she picked up her pace and was putting distance between her and the 2 people that were flanking her. Something went off in my brain to tell me, gather more information about this person.
David notices a scar on the woman's right shin, and she also seems to be pointing out several tattoos.
I was 2 feet away from her. 2 feet. That's how close I was. I don't even have to think about it. It's 100%. It's not 99, it's 100. It's 100%, it was her. It was.
He would later say that one of the men fit the description of Alistair Douglas. The cab driver and Carmichael's accounts further cemented her family's initial fears that she had been kidnapped, forced off the ship, and was now being held captive on the island. Theories surrounding the sex slave industry and potential human trafficking would further arise. In the fall of 1999, the Bradley family finally saw a glimmer of hope. They were contacted by a private investigator called Frank Jones, who was a former US Army Special Forces officer. He was keen to help the family and believed he had the means and the backing of his old Army Ranger colleagues to help save her. Jones had heard from an insider, a cook called Margarita, that Amy was being held captive in a housing complex surrounded by barbed wire and guards. She said she often saw Amy shopping and working out, but was never alone and was always with a man with long blonde hair. She was able to give accurate details of Amy's many tattoos, and the Bradleys agreed that this lead could not be ignored. Between Ron, Ivor, friends, other family members, and even Ron's former company, a total of $210,000 was paid to Frank Jones over several years to help with what could be an immense and difficult rescue mission. He sent the family several pictures of a woman on a beach with a man with long blonde hair. She had Amy's build and the same tattoo on her ankle. Ron and Ivor finally had some hope that their beloved daughter was alive. This hope would come crashing down when the truth finally came out. Frank Jones was actually a cold-hearted and manipulative con man. He had never served in the army and had been spending their money on what was essentially a long holiday. The photos were posed for by models, with a man wearing a blonde wig and a fake tattoo on the woman's ankle. Margarita was also a liar who had taken around $8,000 from the family. This only came to light when another private investigator and trusted friend of the Bradleys, Tim Buchholz, began to keep a closer eye on Jones. He observed him for a long time and contacted the Bradleys to tell them the truth about the man they had trusted to help them. The family were devastated. In February 2002, Jones was charged with defrauding both the Bradleys and the nation's missing children's organisation. He pleaded guilty to mail fraud and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was also told to repay every penny. Ron Bradley would later say, "If it was your child, what would you do? So I guess we took a chance, and I guess we lost." Another lead was reported to the FBI, again from the island of Curacao. Back in 1999, an American naval officer was visiting a brothel. He claimed that a woman walked straight up to him, grabbed his arm, and said her name was Amy Bradley. She needed help, and she was being held captive. The naval officer never reported this to anyone for fear of the repercussions that would come with admitting he had been in a brothel while on duty. When the FBI eventually got hold of this information, it turned out the brothel had since burned down, and there was no evidence or further witnesses to be found there. Another massive lead came in 2005 when a photo was anonymously emailed to the family. It showed a woman called Jazz on an escort site based in the Caribbean. A forensic detective compared these photos to the photos of Amy from 7 years ago and determined it was absolutely her. He said he would even bet his career on it. This image was circulated using an appearance on the Dr. Phil show in November 2005. Again in 2005, a lady named Judy Mora claimed she had seen Amy in the public bathroom of a department store in Barbados. She was closely guarded by 3 men who were threatening her to make sure she followed through on some sort of deal. As soon as the men left, Judy tried to help the woman. She said her name was Amy and began to say she was from Virginia when she was pulled away by the men. Despite multiple claims of sightings, pictures and new composite sketches of what Amy could look like now, she is still missing and no charges have ever been filed in her disappearance. 12 years after Amy disappeared in 1998, she was declared dead in absentia on March 24, 2010. Her family continue to pray daily that they will find out the truth as to what happened to their daughter, and the FBI welcome any further details regarding the case. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Amy Lynn Bradley, please contact the FBI. Alternatively, you can leave an anonymous tip online.